Hi there, my name is Andrea, and this is High Literature, a program where I introduce books and comics and stories to you, the viewer. In the last video, I was talking about Les Misérables, the complete and unabridged edition. This book is huge. Apparently, there is a list of the longest books in the world, and this is on that list. And I was specifically talking about a chapter. It's chapter 10 in volume 1, book 1. It's a really great title. It's called The Bishop in the Presence of an Unfamiliar Light. So this is chapter 10, and all the chapters before it are about the bishop. And it's basically setting up the audience to come to realize that we have this person who is just the epitome of virtue, just compassionate, kind, a source to the community of comfort and solace and wisdom and kindness and just everything that you could want in somebody in a position that the bishop is in. And this chapter, The Bishop in the Presence of an Unfamiliar Light, is one of my favorites because it's addressing the understanding and the appreciation for how you can have a person who you have on this pedestal and you come to find out that at the end of the day they're still human and they're still flawed and they can still make mistakes and they can still learn. They're still able to learn. There are still things in life that can happen to teach them new ways of thinking and feeling and existing and interacting with the people in your life and how you treat them. And this chapter, a couple things. I had this experience several years ago where I talked about this in the last video, where I overheard this conversation about this book and in particular this chapter, and I was so sad because they were not happy with it. They described it as boring and tedious and just how it was about this sunset that took forever. And it was so disappointing to hear because on one hand, I could see why they would think that. There's a lot going on in this chapter. There's a lot of history. And let's face it, I mean, it's Les Miserables. There's a lot of words that I'm going to do a reading and just, I guess is a good time to go into that. I don't speak French. I am not familiar with the French language. And I think this is a perfect demonstration of how it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't know about the specific details of history that's going on in this part of the book or how to pronounce the language, because it's about the story. It's about the content. It's about the heart. It's about the soul. It's about the spirit of the book. And that was one of the reasons. I mean, you see how huge this book is? This is something that I had to take breaks reading because it would get so heavy and my wrists would start to ache. And I've read this easily 6 times, if not more, this giant thing. And it's because, it's a testament to the writer, to Victor Hugo, that he can write about these things that I don't know anything about, but the story itself, historical facts aside, are just so beautiful in its universal truth and the way that it just connects to every single person that has ever experienced any kind of feeling. And I just loved that I could read such a daunting, appearing, it just, I mean, look at this thing. It's very intimidating. And it just didn't matter that I'm not a history buff, that I don't know, I'm not familiar with the French language. The story is just so universal. I could connect with it anyway on a level that made me revisit this over and over again. And I recently was reminded of that conversation where they were talking about how they found the chapter tedious. I saw this article online about like the 10 best sunsets in literature. And I, clicked on it and was so excited to read this list because I wanted to see them talk about this. And I wanted, you get that feeling of like validation and, somebody gets it too when you see that they experienced the same thing, and I was just so excited to read, in this article talking about this sunset, and they didn't. I was so I felt slighted. I know that sounds silly, but I'm human and flawed and ridiculous, and I felt just offended by that. So I figured the best thing I could do, there's so many things out there. We will never read it all. We will never hear it all. We will never see it all. There's so much art. You're just not going to get it all. So this is my contribution to that. I think this is a beautiful example of just one of the best sunsets in literature, as this article said, and also a great example of how you don't have to know anything about, the history of what's going on at this particular point of time in the world, at this particular point of time in human history, or another language, to appreciate the universal connectivity of the heart and the spirit and how you think, and even if you don't agree with it, it's just interesting to see another point of view and have something to get into a debate with. I have this friend, I'm going to have a conversation with him later tonight. I'm very excited, and one of the things we're going to talk about, it's a topic that we're going to have very opposing points of view on this. But we love each other and care about each other and respect each other. And even though we don't agree, we can still talk about these things that we don't agree about and share why we don't agree about it. And there have been times we've had these conversations and we've changed the other person's mind. And anyway, with all that being said, in my completely flawed French, but don't pay attention to that. It's the story. This is Chapter 10, Volume 1, Book 1 of Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, and it is called The Bishop in the Presence of an Unfamiliar Light. In the countryside near Digne, there was a man who lived alone. This man, to state the startling fact right off, had been a member of the National Convention. His name was G. And as you can see here, they cut off his name. That's all you get, a G, and that's it. That's all she wrote. The narrow world of Digne spoke of the former deputy with a sort of horror. A revolutionary conventionist, think of it. That was in the time when people thee and thou'd one another and called everyone citizen. This man was practically a monster. He had not exactly voted for the execution of the king, but almost. He was half a regicide. Why then, with the restoration of the legitimate monarchy, had they not arraigned him before the provost's court? He would not have been beheaded, probably, but even if clemency prevailed, he might have been banished for life. Besides, he was an atheist like the others, babblings of geese against a vulture. But was this G a vulture? Yes, if one should judge him by the savageness of his isolation. Because he had not voted for the king's execution, he was not included in the sentence of exile and could remain in France. He lived about an hour's walk from town, far from any hamlet or road, in a desolate ravine of a wild valley. He was said to have a sort of shelter there, some clearing. He had no neighbors, and nobody even passed by. Since he had come, the path leading to the place had become overgrown, and people spoke of it as they would of a hangman's house. From time to time, however, the bishop thoughtfully gazed at the spot on the horizon where a clump of trees indicated the former conventionist's ravine, and he would say, "There lives a lonely soul." And deep down, he would add, "I owe him a visit." But we must confess that this idea, natural enough at first glance, seemed strange, impractical, almost repulsive after a few moments' reflection. For at heart, he shared the general impression, and the conventionist inspired him somehow with that feeling, akin to hatred, so well expressed by the word aversion. The shepherd should not recoil from the diseased sheep. Oh, but such a black sheep. The good bishop was confused. Sometimes he would start out in that direction, but then turn back. At last, one day, the news was circulated in town that the young shepherd who served the conventionist in his retreat had come for a doctor, that the poor man was dying, that he was paralyzed and could not live through the night. Thank God, some said. The bishop took his cane, put on his cloak because he wanted to hide the badly worn cassock, and also because the night wind would be rising, and set out. The setting sun had nearly touched the horizon when the bishop reached the accursed spot. A certain quickening of the pulse told him he was near the lair. He jumped over a ditch, cleared a hedge, made his way through a brush fence, found himself in a dilapidated garden, and after boldly walking across the open ground, suddenly, behind some high shrubbery, he caught sight of the retreat. It was a low, impoverished hut, small and clean, with a little vine clinging to the front. In front of the door, in an old peasant chair on rollers, sat a man with white hair, smiling toward the setting sun. The young shepherd stood beside him, handing him a bowl of milk. As the bishop watched, the old man spoke. Thank you, he said. I won't need anything else. And his smile moved from the sun to rest on the boy. The bishop stepped forward. At the sound of his footsteps, the old man turned his head, and his face expressed as much surprise as one can feel at the end of a long life. This is the first time since I have lived here, he said, that I have had a visitor. Who are you, monsieur? My name is Bienvenu Muriel, the bishop replied. Bienvenu Muriel? I have heard that name before. Are you the one the people call Monseigneur Bienvenu? I am. The old man went on, half smiling. Then you are my bishop. In a way. Welcome, monsieur. The conventionist extended his hand to the bishop, who did not take it. He only said, I am glad to find that I have been misinformed. You do not appear to be very ill. Monsieur, replied the old man, I will soon be better. He paused, then added, in 3 hours, I will be dead. Then he went on. I am something of a physician. I know the steps by which death approaches. Yesterday, only my feet were cold. Today, the cold has crept to my knees. Now it has reached the waist. When it reaches the heart, all will be over. The sunset is lovely, don't you think? I had myself wheeled out for one last look at nature. You can speak to me. That won't tire me. You are right to come to see a dying man. It is right that these moments should have witnesses. Everyone has his dream. I would like to live till dawn, but I know I have less than 3 hours left. It will be night, but no matter. Dying is simple. It does not take daylight. So be it. I will die by starlight. The old man turned toward the shepherd. Little one, go to bed. You stayed up all last night. You're tired. The child went into the hut. The old man followed him with his eyes and added as though to himself, while he's sleeping, I'll die. The two slumbers are good brothers. The bishop was not as moved as he might have been. This did not seem a godly death. We must tell everything, for the little inconsistencies of great souls should be mentioned. He who laughed so heartily at His Highness was still slightly shocked at not being called Monseigneur and was almost tempted to answer citizen. He felt a desire for the brusque familiarity common enough with doctors and priests, but not proper for him. This conventionist, after all, this representative of the people, had wielded power on this earth, and perhaps for the first time in his life, the bishop felt in a mood to be severe. The conventionist, however, treated him with modest consideration and cordiality, in which one might perceive a humility proper to one so nearly dust unto dust. The bishop, for his part, though generally free from curiosity, which he found almost offensive, could not keep from examining the conventionist with an attention that, as it did not spring from sympathy, would have seemed unconscionable regarding any other man. But he regarded a conventionist as an outlaw, even beyond the law of charity. G, with his calm, almost erect figure and resonant voice, was one of those noble octogenarians who are the marvel of doctors. The revolution produced many such men equal to the era. One felt that here was a man tested by life. Though so near death, he appeared healthy. His bright glances, his firm speech, and the muscular movements of his shoulders seemed almost enough to disconcert death. Azrael, the Islamic angel of the sepulchre, would have turned back, thinking he had the wrong door. G appeared to be dying because he wished to die. There was liberty in his dying. Only his legs were paralyzed. His feet were cold and dead, but his head lived in the full power of life and clarity. At this solemn moment, G seemed like the king in the Oriental tale, flesh above and marble below. The bishop seated himself on a nearby stone. Their conversation began abruptly. "I congratulate you," he said in a tone of reprimand. "At least you did not vote for the king's execution." The conventionist did not seem to notice the bitter emphasis placed on the words "at least." The smile vanished from his face. "Do not congratulate me too much, monsieur. I did vote for the destruction of the tyrant." And the tone of austerity confronted the tone of severity. "What do you mean?" asked the bishop. "I meant that man has one tyrant, ignorance. I voted for the abolition of that tyrant. That tyrant fathered royalty, which is authority springing from the false, whereas science is authority springing from the true. Man should be governed by science. And conscience," added the bishop. "They are the same. Conscience is science." Monsieur Benvenu listened with some amazement to this language, as it was new to him. The revolutionary went on. "As to Louis XVI, I said no. I do not believe I have the right to kill a man, but I feel it a duty to exterminate evil. I voted for the downfall of the tyrant, that is, for the abolition of prostitution for woman, of slavery for man, of darkness for the child. In voting for the Republic, I voted for that. I voted for fraternity, for harmony, for dawn. I helped to overthrow prejudice and error. Their downfall brings light. We brought down the old world. A jug of misery overturned becomes a vessel of joy to humanity." "Joy alloyed," said the bishop. "You might say troubled joy, and at present, after this fatal return of the past that we call 1814, vanquished joy. Alas, the work was imperfect, I admit. We demolished the ancient order of things physically, but not entirely in the idea. To destroy abuses is not enough. Habits must also be changed. The windmill has gone, but the wind is still there. You have demolished. To demolish may be useful, but I distrust destruction made in anger. Justice has its anger, Monsieur Bishop, and the wrath of justice is an element of progress. No matter what they say, the French Revolution is the greatest advance taken by mankind since the coming of Christ. Incomplete it may be, but it is sublime. It loosened all the secret chains of society. It softened all hearts. It calmed, appeased, enlightened. It caused waves of civilization to flow over the earth. It was good. The French Revolution is the consecration of humanity." The bishop could not help murmuring, "Yes." "And 93? The former deputy sat up in his chair with an almost mournful solemnity, and as well as a dying person could, he exclaimed, "Ah, of course, 93. I was expecting that. A cloud had been forming for 1,500 years, and at the end of 15 centuries it burst. You are condemning the thunderbolt." Without perhaps acknowledging it, the bishop was moved. However, he regained his composure and replied, "The judge speaks in the name of justice, the priest in the name of pity, which is only a more exalted justice. Such a thunderbolt should not make mistakes." And he added, glaring at the revolutionary, "Louis XVII?" The conventionist stretched out his hand and seized the bishop's arm. Louis XVII. Let's see. For whom do you weep? For the innocent child? Good. I weep with you. For the royal child? I ask time to reflect. In my view, the brother of Catorce, an innocent child, hung by a rope under his arms in the Place de Grève till he died, for the sole crime of being the brother of Catorce, is a no less painful sight than the grandson of Louis XV, an innocent child murdered in the Tower of the Temple for the sole crime of being the grandson of Louis XV. Monsieur, the bishop said, I disapprove of this coupling of names. Catorce or Louis XV? For which one are you concerned? There was a moment of silence. The bishop almost regretted that he had come, and yet he felt strangely and inexplicably moved. The former deputy went on. Oh, Monsieur Priest, you do not like the harshness of truth, but Christ loved it. He took a scourge and purged the temple. His flashing whip was a rude truth-teller. When he said Sinite Parvulos, he made no distinction among the little ones. He was not pained at coupling the Dauphine of Barabbas with the Dauphine of Herod. Monsieur, innocence is its own crown. Innocence can only be noble. She is as august in rags as in the fleur-de-lis. That's true, the bishop said quietly. I repeat, the old man continued, you've mentioned Louis XVII. I agree. Let's weep together for all the innocent, all the martyrs, all the children, humble as well as mighty. I'm for that. But then, as I said, we must go further back than 93, and our tears must start before Louis XVII. I will weep for the children of kings with you, if you will weep with me for the children of the people. I weep for them all, the bishop said. Equally, G exclaimed. And if the balance tips, let it be on the side of the people. They have suffered longer. There was silence again, broken at last by the old man. He raised himself up on one elbow, pinched one of his cheeks, as one does unconsciously in examining and forming an opinion, then addressed the bishop with a look full of all the energies of dying. It was like an explosion. Yes, monsieur, the people have been suffering for a long time. And then, sir, that's not all. Why do you come to question me and to speak to me of Louis XVII? I don't know you. Since I have been in this region, I have lived within these walls all alone, never going beyond them, seeing no one but this child who helps me. Your name has, it is true, reached me confusedly, and I must say not without respect, but no matter. Clever men have so many ways of impressing the good and simple people. For instance, I did not hear the sound of your carriage. You undoubtedly left it behind the thicket down there at the fork in the road. You have told me you are the bishop, but that tells me nothing about your moral integrity. Now then, I repeat my question. Who are you? You are a bishop, a prince of the church, one of those men covered with gold, insignia, and wealth, a fat sinecure, the See of Dean, 15,000 francs per year, 10,000 francs contingent, total 25,000 francs. You have kitchens and retinues, give fine dinners, eat good poultry on Friday, show off in your gaudy coaches like peacocks, lackeys in front and lackeys behind. You have palaces and travel about in the name of Jesus Christ, who walked barefoot. You are a prelate. Rents, palaces, horses, valets, a good table, all the sensuous pleasures of life. You have these like all the rest, and like all the rest, you enjoy them. Very well, but that says too much and not enough. It does not enlighten me as to your intrinsic worth, what is unique to yourself, you who probably come with the claim of bringing me wisdom. To whom am I speaking? Who are you? The bishop bowed his head and replied, Vermis sum. An earthworm in a carriage, grumbled the old man. It was the turn of the conventionists to be haughty and the bishop to be humble. The bishop replied gently, Monsieur, so be it, but explain to me how my carriage... We'll have to